November 20th, 1943. The plan said the boats would float over the reef. The ocean said no. At Betio Island, on the edge of Tarawa Atoll, American Marines were still hundreds of yards from the beach when the first Japanese guns found them. Not on sand, not behind cover, in the water, chest deep. Rifles held above their heads. Packs dragging at their shoulders, coral cutting through their boots. They could not run because the water was too deep. They could not swim because the reef was too shallow. So they walked. A Marine carrying almost 60 pounds of gear stepped into a hole in the coral and vanished. The man behind him saw the water close over the place where he had been. Then he stepped around it and kept moving. That was the first truth Tarawa gave America. Before the island changed doctrine, before it changed reconnaissance, before it helped create the underwater demolition teams that would lead toward the modern Navy SEALs, it taught one brutal lesson. A perfect plan can die in 3 feet of water, and men still have to walk through what is left. Betio was tiny, barely 2 miles long, narrow enough that, in places, a man could look from lagoon to ocean and understand the whole island in one glance. But in 1943, that strip of coral carried a value far larger than its size. It had an airfield. That one runway could threaten American movement through the Central Pacific. Without Tarawa, the Marshalls were harder. Without the Marshalls, the Marianas were farther. Without the Marianas, the road to Japan stretched longer and bloodier. Tokyo knew it, so Japan did not leave Betio to chance. Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki was sent to turn the island into a killing machine. He had studied amphibious landings. He understood where attackers became weakest. He knew the terrible moment when men leave the protection of their boats but have not yet reached land. That space between water and sand became his obsession. To Shibasaki, Betio was not a tropical island. It was a geometry problem, and every line of that geometry pointed toward the reef. For 11 months his men dug, poured, stacked, buried, reinforced, and aimed. Concrete pillboxes were built into the island. Coconut logs were layered into walls thick enough to swallow shell fragments. Trenches ran behind positions so defenders could move without showing themselves. Artillery pits were placed to overlap fields of fire. Heavy guns watched the approaches through the lagoon. Every weapon had a job. The guns on the beach covered the reef. The guns behind the beach covered the seawall. The guns deeper inland covered the guns in front of them. There was no friendly empty space in the water. No lane where a man could wade without being seen. No angle where the reef forgot him. When the work was finished, Shibasaki told his garrison that it would take 1,000,000 Americans 100 years to conquer Tarawa. It sounded like arrogance. It was not only arrogance. He had done the math. He had just left one variable out. On paper, the American force looked overwhelming. Carriers, battleships, destroyers, tens of thousands of men, aircraft overhead, naval guns offshore, an assault plan built on shock, speed, and firepower. The Marines expected to ride landing craft across the reef and hit the beach under the protection of a bombardment so heavy that officers believed little could remain alive. But the whole plan depended on one small sentence. The tide would rise. The Higgins boats needed roughly 5 feet of water to clear the reef. A New Zealand officer named Frank Holland had lived around Tarawa long enough to know the water better than the charts did. Before the assault, he warned the commanders that the tide would not give them what they needed. Not 5 feet. Closer to 3. He pleaded for a delay. The attack went forward. Colonel David Shoup understood what that meant. He had received command of his regiment only days before the assault. He was 38, from Indiana, a career Marine without the famous battlefield reputation of some men around him. He was not given a clean plan. He was given a regiment, a reef, and a tide he could not command. So before his Marines boarded, he told them the truth as plainly as he could. There was a real chance they would have to get out and walk. That was the warning, not a speech, not a promise. Just the sentence every man would remember when the boat stopped short of the beach. Before dawn, the bombardment began. Battleships opened fire. Aircraft rolled over Betio in waves. Smoke climbed so thick over the island that men watching from offshore could barely see the shoreline. To the Americans, it looked like annihilation. Inside the bunkers, Japanese troops waited. Concrete did what it had been built to do. It absorbed, it sheltered, it kept men alive with their hands still on their weapons. Then the first assault waves moved in. The tracked amphibious vehicles, the Amtraks, could cross the reef. At least, the ones that did not break down or burn could cross it. They crawled forward through a sheet of fire. Japanese anti-aircraft guns had been lowered until they could shoot flat across the water. Machine guns had been pre-sighted on the reef line. Artillery found the lagoon. One Amtrak lurched. Another burned. Another turned in circles after its driver was hit. Behind them came the Higgins boats. They reached the reef and stopped. 3 feet of water. The Marines inside looked over the side. 600 yards. In places, 700. Open lagoon, coral holes, smoke, burning vehicles, machine guns already firing. Then men began climbing out. This is the image that stayed. Not a charge. Not a clean landing. A long line of men walking slowly through water while an island shot at them. Japanese defenders later wrote that they expected Americans to break under direct fire. They watched men fall. Then they watched the next men keep coming. It made no sense to them. But it did not have to make sense. It only had to keep moving. Shoup's own vehicle was hit. He transferred. That one was disabled too. He went into the water with everyone else. Shrapnel tore into his leg. A round cut near his neck. He kept going until he reached the seawall. What he found there was not a landing. It was the wreckage of a landing. Radios had drowned. Units were mixed together. Officers were dead or missing. Men who had started the morning in organized waves were now crouched along a strip of sand barely wide enough to live on. Behind them was the lagoon. In front of them was Shibasaki's fortress. Above them, the plan was gone. Shoup did not have enough information to command the battle the way it had been drawn on a map, so he commanded the piece of the war directly in front of him. He looked at the men against the seawall and asked if they had the guts to follow a Marine colonel. They stood up. That was not victory. That was the beginning of the real battle. Because once the Marines crossed the wall, they discovered something no bombardment report had shown. Shibasaki's fortress was almost perfect from the front. From the inside, it was blind. Each bunker could dominate the slice of beach it faced. But thick concrete also trapped the men inside their own field of view. A firing slit could see straight ahead and almost nowhere else. The trenches were supposed to solve that problem. The bombardment had not destroyed the fortress, but it had damaged enough of the connecting trenches to break the island's nervous system. Japanese defenders trying to shift from one strong point to another had to cross open ground. And the Marines, once they got past the seawall, owned pieces of that open ground. That was the first crack, not a dramatic collapse, not a cinematic breakthrough. A narrow flaw in a perfect machine, and exhausted Marines pushed their hands into it. They used flamethrowers, satchel charges, grenades, rifle fire into firing slits. One man covering while another crawled close enough to throw explosive into a bunker mouth, yard by yard, room by room, concrete box by concrete box. There was no elegant way to take Betio. There was only the next position, and then the next. Sometime that first day, Shibasaki moved from one command position to another. The island he had built could survive naval shells. He could not. A destroyer offshore fired into the island's spine. One shell landed among the admiral and his staff as they crossed exposed ground. Shibasaki was killed. So were many of the men who could have coordinated the defense after him. He died before he knew the result of the battle. He did not know whether his island was holding. He did not know that the Americans he had promised to stop had already broken through the first hard shell of his defense. He did not know that the perfect fortress had lost its mind while its body kept fighting. Night came. The Marines lay behind the seawall with no clean line, little water, and almost no certainty. Some had been awake for more than a day. Some were wounded and silent. Some were still on the reef, sitting upright in stranded craft, listening to the island fire in the dark. Offshore, commanders tried to understand what was happening through broken reports and drowned radios. On the island, Shoup moved along the line. His leg was swollen. He was limping. He checked ammunition. He found gaps. He asked who was alive. He kept the landing from becoming a rumor. At one point, he managed to send a message back to the command ship. Combat efficiency. We are winning. 4 words. Not because the beach looked like winning. It did not. Because Shoup understood that in a battle like Tarawa, winning did not begin when the enemy collapsed. It began when your own men did not. Dawn on the second day brought more Marines through the same water. They passed wrecked Amtraks. They passed bodies in the lagoon. They passed the evidence of everything that had gone wrong. But now they were feeding into a line that still existed. That mattered. The battle became a grinding system of assault teams and bunkers. No slogan opened concrete. No bravery by itself cleared a pillbox. Courage had to become procedure. Flamethrower to the slit. Grenade to the vent. Satchel charge to the entrance. Cover, crawl, throw, burn, move. Again, again, again. On the second day, Marines crossed the airstrip. The runway was the reason Betio mattered. It was the reason Japan had fortified the island, and the reason the Marines had walked through the reef. Crossing it did not feel like a grand moment. It felt like men running in small groups under fire, dropping flat, rising again, and disappearing into the next patch of cover. By the third day, the eastern end of the island was being squeezed. Japanese survivors fought from isolated pockets. The organized defense had been severed into pieces. Then it was over. 76 hours after the first wave entered the lagoon, Betio had fallen. Out of roughly 4,500 Japanese defenders, only a handful survived. More than 1,000 Marines were dead. More than 2,000 were wounded. All of it on an island so small that a man could walk its length in less time than it takes to finish a meal. After the battle, American officers studied the defenses. Their conclusion was not comforting. Shibasaki had done his work well. The bunkers were strong. The fields of fire were right. The guns were placed with brutal intelligence. The reef had been used exactly as a defender should use it. The fortress had not failed because it was weak. It failed because war is not only engineering. It is also friction, damage, confusion, dead radios, broken trenches, a commander killed in the open, and men who keep moving after the plan that carried them there has disappeared. That was the lesson America bought at Tarawa, and the price was written in the lagoon. But the Marine Corps did something important with the pain. It did not pretend the battle had gone according to plan. It did not bury the reef under speeches. It studied the failure, the tide error, the inadequate reef reconnaissance, the short bombardment, the drowning radios, the landing craft stranded before the beach, the lack of reliable ways to see underwater obstacles before the assault. Within weeks, underwater demolition teams were being formed. Their job was almost insane in its simplicity. Swim ahead of future landings. In the dark, in dangerous water, ahead of the fleet, measure the reef, mark the obstacles, learn the beach before thousands of men were asked to cross it. Those swimmers became part of a line that later led to the Navy SEALs. That does not make Tarawa less costly. It makes the cost harder to ignore, because the next landings changed. Bombardments grew longer and more systematic. Reconnaissance became more serious. Amphibious tractors became more important. Communication systems were studied and repaired. Future commanders did not simply ask whether a beach could be taken. They asked what Tarawa had missed. Kwajalein came soon after. The fleet did not arrive with the same assumptions. The bombardment lasted days, not hours. Reefs were checked more carefully. Waves came in with better information. Artillery and infantry coordination improved. The fight was still savage. Japanese defenders still fought with a discipline that shocked anyone who measured war only in casualty reports. But the landing was not Tarawa again. That mattered. Every man who came ashore with better reconnaissance carried the shadow of the men who had waited blind at Betio. Every landing craft that crossed a mapped reef carried the memory of the boats that stopped in 3 feet of water. Every working radio on a future beach answered the silence Tarawa had left behind. David Shoup survived Tarawa. He received the Medal of Honor for what he did there while wounded, cut off, and commanding through chaos. But the most revealing part of his life may be what came later. He rose until he became Commandant of the Marine Corps. Then, after retirement, he publicly opposed the Vietnam War. That shocked people who preferred their heroes simple. They wanted Tarawa to mean obedience without question. Shoup seemed to believe it meant something harder. He had seen what happens when institutional momentum rolls over ground-level truth. He had seen a man who knew the tide be ignored because the operation was already moving. He had watched Marines pay for that momentum with their lives. So when he believed another war was being driven by power, habit, and machinery larger than truth, he said so. It cost him friendships. It cost him standing. It did not make Tarawa smaller. It made the lesson larger. Because Tarawa was never just a story about courage. Courage was there, everywhere, in almost unbearable amounts. But courage is not the whole lesson. If courage were the only lesson, then the reef would become a shrine and nothing more. The harder lesson is that brave men can be sent into preventable failure by confident institutions. And if the institution survives, it has a duty to change faster than it wants to. Tarawa forced that change, not gracefully, not cheaply, but clearly. Years later, search teams returned to Betio to find Marines who had never come home. Some had been buried hastily. Some had been lost beneath later construction. Some had rested for decades under the airfield they died to take. For their families, Tarawa was not a map arrow in a Pacific campaign. It was an empty chair, a name spoken once and then swallowed, a photograph that stopped aging, a story that ended in water. The reef is still there. The tide still moves over it. And that is the terrible simplicity of the place. On one morning in 1943, the water did not rise high enough. The boats stopped. The radios failed. The fortress fired, and men stepped into the lagoon anyway. Some never reached the sand. Some reached it and were gone before night. Some lived long enough to carry the lesson forward, into doctrine, into reconnaissance, into the next beach where another Marine did not have to wade blind. That is what Tarawa became. Not a clean victory, not a noble myth, a wound that taught. The reef did not just stop the boats. It stopped certainty.